So, we're going to be talking this week all about the genetic side of things and how it affects fitness and nutrition, but also the hormonal side. So, if you remember a couple of weeks ago before we had the break, and thank you for being patient last week for that break, we were talking about perimenopause and menopause. So, what I'm going to cover today is even if you're in perimenopause or you're just in your cycle, what you can do to really optimize things around your menstrual cycle to alleviate things like PMS, but also to have as many ovulation events as you possibly can. So, one of the important things that you want to be doing is every ovulation event builds deposits in your brain bank and metabolic health accounts, and so they're actually really really important. But even post menopause, what you'll see is you want to still try to optimize even the small amounts of estrogen that's being produced alongside progesterone. And if you are very stressed post menopause, for example, you're going to have less progesterone production. If you're very stressed during your cycling years, you're still going to also have less progesterone production, and that can really affect things like PMS. But post menopause, in that respect, it almost becomes more important because we're relying on the adrenals to pick up that progesterone production. And this actually really affects things like GABA in your brain, how calm you feel. And so I want to show you that whole interaction. Now, it's going to be more difficult when you're in perimenopause, so in your 40s, if you're starting to get disruption and you're sort of 40s and early 50s and you're getting some disruption to try to cycle, sort of sync things around your cycle, but it still can be done. And even things like, I'm just going to mute everyone. And also, even things like seed cycling, for example, because there are still there's still estrogen being produced, albeit to a much smaller degree, and there's still progesterone being produced. Things like seed cycling can still help. You would just start doing it at any point in the month that you wanted to, and do it for 2 weeks at a time. And so you'll see how that works as well. But essentially, once you've crossed through menopause, your ovaries are still going to continue to make testosterone. And they'll continue to do that for a good kind of 20 years pretty effectively. You may get a drop off, and that's where consulting with a doctor, like we spoke about in that presentation 2 weeks ago, so for anyone who's missed it, you can go back and watch it, can be helpful to actually see, well, what are my levels of progesterone, estrogen and testosterone. And sometimes having some replacement therapy can be a really, really positive thing alongside all of the other lifestyle and nutritional and fitness things that we're doing. So what I'm going to do here is just show you, I'm going to share my slides and I'll just show you some things. And then what we can do on Wednesday's call, as usual, is to kind of go through questions and things. So here we go. Just going to share this. Hopefully you can now see my slides. Yes? Okay, brilliant. Let's start from here. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that happens, like I mentioned there, is PMS, which is premenstrual syndrome. And some people really struggle with this. You can get all kinds of symptoms. You may get headaches, for example. You may get irritability. You may get more bloating. There's all kind of range of symptoms that people get in that lead up to their period. But this can occur up to 10 days before, and then it disappears a few days into the bleed. That's when you then start to feel better. Some people feel very depleted on energy in the first few days of their cycle. Others actually feel really, really revitalized. But this is kind of a little bit blurry here. But you can see that on a 28-day cycle, we've got the main event of ovulation occurring in the middle of the month. And in the lead up to this, estrogen's rising. And we also have a rise in luteinizing hormone, which helps that ovulatory event occur, and follicle stimulating hormone. And then we need progesterone afterwards to counterbalance the effects of estrogen. And that's why it's so important that we're optimizing for progesterone production. And if we don't have enough progesterone, that's when we can kind of feel quite anxious. So these are the kind of symptoms you can get, and you might identify with any of these. And these again also can come on in perimenopause. So for example, like palpitations is a really common symptom that many women get as they're going through the perimenopause and menopause years. And it's become quite recognized now as a symptom. And this is as things like progesterone are not at optimal levels. You can also feel really emotional. Sometimes you can feel quite irritable with people. Sometimes you feel quite tearful. People's symptoms depend. But if you've got higher levels of inflammation in your body, these kinds of symptoms are going to be exacerbated. And so the symptoms that are exacerbated during your cycling years can also be exacerbated during your perimenopausal years. And there does seem to be some correlation between people who get a lot of symptoms during their cycling years, often having a harder time of it in the perimenopause years as well. So everything that we're doing in the program is designed obviously to keep inflammation low, to regulate blood sugar, which becomes harder in those perimenopausal years, but and takes a little bit more attention. However, everything that we're doing there is going to have the knock-on effect of actually improving any hormonal symptoms and if you have as well. So you can also get something known as, not to be confused, right? So you can have PMS, which is a set of symptoms on its own that occur in those 10 days. And these are these top symptoms that we're talking about here. You can also have something known as premenstrual magnification. So this is separate. This is something that you would experience at other times of the month, but this gets worse now. So it's a temporary worsening of symptoms. So for example, you're someone that often struggles with things like headaches or digestive symptoms, this can become aggravated at that time of the month. And you may get things like sugar cravings. They're very, very common. But remember that at this second stage, as you're leading up to your period, you've actually got more calorie flexibility, more carbohydrate flexibility at this time of the month. And so you can actually sort of alleviate a lot of those sugar cravings by incorporating more whole food carbohydrates. And that can actually lessen off because you feel more satisfied. And even if you are on, if fat loss is a goal for you on this program, that doesn't matter because, as I say, you're going to have around 250 to 300 extra calories that you can consume at that time of the month. But essentially, we need to look at underlying inflammation. And so if you have higher levels, like genetically, you're predisposed to higher levels of inflammation. If you're someone who is a poorer recovery from exercise, that would be something you would want to take into account. So at the end of that month, when we're trying to optimize for progesterone production, this is not the time to be going and trying to crush a WOD or a really intense HIIT workout, most particularly if you're someone that is a slow recoverer. And you can see that in the fitness part of your genetic report, because you're likely to have higher levels of inflammation anyway. You might be somebody, for example, who it shows on your report that you've got a need for higher levels of EPA, right? EPA is one of those things that we convert plant-based omega-3s into, and it's also contained in animal-based ones. So like omega-3 fish oil will have a proportion of EPA, and that really effectively helps to lower inflammation. So you can look at this and look at your symptoms and then accordingly kind of put these together to see, well, actually, do I really feel like that workout? And if you're not feeling it at the end of the month, I wouldn't suggest that you just push on ahead and do it anyway, because that's when you can really start to get more of this disruption that we see. It's very much a Goldilocks effect with estrogen. So estrogen's, she's amazing. She like makes your skin look really lovely and glowing. You know, we know that when we do studies and we see women that work in restaurants, they get more tips at ovulation. Naturally, they're more attractive. They're more outward focused and outgoing. And so she's kind of like a charismatic friend, right? You don't want her to hang around too long at the party or become too overbearing. And progesterone is your friend because she basically offsets some of the effects estrogen can have. And in that, what you saw when we did the presentation 2 weeks ago is when you look at perimenopause, what's happening is you've got this drop off in progesterone, but it's almost like progesterone kind of sneaks out the back door and you're like, why am I feeling more anxious? Why am I not quite sleeping so well? Why do I feel like this? There's nothing really obvious. Whereas estrogen really makes her presence felt and makes her presence felt whether she's there or she's not there. And if you get these big swings and estrogen drops, that's when you get things like hot flashes occur. So it's much more obvious when you've got things like estrogen dominance or estrogen dropping off. But estrogen boosts serotonin, so it's really important. Estrogen is a great trigger for muscle protein synthesis, which is why when we get to perimenopause, we've got to work a bit harder and lift a bit heavier. We've got to increase our protein requirements post-menopause compared to a woman who's in her ovulating years. We have better insulin sensitivity when estrogen's around. So we really want to try as much as we possibly can during perimenopause to regulate these hormones. Now, if you have too much estrogen, that's when you can get problems, and you'll get a lot of fluid retention. Progesterone, again, offsets that bloating and that fluid retention. You can feel quite irritable, and you can get things like breast pain as well. Sometimes a deficit in iodine can also cause breast pain problems, and supplementing with that can be helpful. So here you've got, as estrogen starts to drop, serotonin and dopamine drop, and this is partly why you can get these sort of PMS-style symptoms. Now, the higher your estrogen goes, the further you fall. It's a little bit like bipolar, right? You get these really big highs and really big lows. So we want to make sure that we're trying to keep this regulated as much as we possibly can. When you get that withdrawal, that's when you get the things like the night sweats, the migraines, the fatigue, and some women will get premenstrual migraines very often, and they can be extremely debilitating. I know many of my clients had this, and it can really lead, if you haven't got this under control, what can happen is you're only having 2 good weeks a month, and that's hugely disruptive to your life, your relationships, your business, anything that you're doing. So progesterone comes into the rescue and kind of shelters those estrogen ups and downs. As you get into perimenopause, if you've been busy producing lots of adrenaline and cortisol, the adrenals are not going to pick this up very well. And it is that progesterone that lightens the menstrual bleed. So it will be an indicative, if you're getting really, really heavy periods, you probably do have some compromised progesterone production. So it's worth looking at it. And actually, as women, we're very lucky because we get this as a biomarker every month. We can see what's happening with our hormones by having a look at what's happening in our cycle. The counterbalance, so it counterbalances estrogen. It also converts to a neurosteroid. So this is why it helps you to feel more relaxed, because it converts into allopregnanolone, and that calms the brain just like GABA. So you can take GABA, you can do things like 4-7-8 breathing to enhance the production of GABA. You know, focusing on your mindfulness and meditation practices, really important as well to encourage the production of more GABA at this time as progesterone is going down, and trying to stabilize that HPA axis is important, which is why I say just going gung-ho and working out really, really hard isn't always the answer, particularly at that time of the month. So we need to produce enough progesterone, we need to be sensitive to it. And if you've got enough progesterone and enough GABA, you're going to have less PMS-style symptoms. So the kind of symptoms you'd get if progesterone is low, you might get spotting in between periods. Because remember, progesterone, like estrogen, rises and holds the uterine lining in place, and then progesterone helps it not kind of get too thick. You may get, if progesterone's low, you may get some breakthrough bleeding coming because it's not sort of holding the cycle as long, and then you get this heavy bleeding when you start your period. If you want to measure it, you need to do it in the mid-luteal phase. So you've got menstruation at the beginning, then you go into the follicular phase when the follicle's ripening, then you have ovulation, and then the second half of that month is the luteal phase. And so generally we test it around days 19 to 21. And so a good thing is if you're doing something like the Dutch test and you're unsure when you ovulate, is you can go to the chemist and buy an ovulation stick test to confirm ovulation, and then you're looking about 5 days later, and that will show us a nice peak of progesterone. So if we're not getting healthy levels of progesterone at that point, we know that something's gone awry. Either you didn't ovulate that month or progesterone production is impaired. You can also track your body temperature. So if you're using the Oura Ring, you should see an elevation around the middle of the month. The Oura isn't, I don't know if you guys have got the Generation 3. I'm wearing it. It's by no means perfect. Every time I've had a period, it tells me that I'm due another one in about 10 days time. It's completely off. I mean, it's only been going like, 2 months. And so I think I've actually actually only tracked one cycle, but then it's like asking me, are you on your period? Have you had one? Like 10 days in, and it's like, no. And even though I've sort of told it what to track, I think they've got more work to do, but in time that will be doing it more. But you can still look at the body temperature raise to see that. If you have high levels of inflammation, as I say, you're going to have less progesterone, you're going to have less GABA, and consequently you're going to have more estrogen production. And you're definitely going to get more estrogen dominance in this scenario, which can cause you some unwanted symptoms. So there's kind of 5 key strategies that you can use to reduce inflammation and to optimize these hormones. We definitely want to get inflammation under control, which we do all of the things that we're doing on this. You know, when we're looking at the types of fats that we're eating, when we're looking at omega-3/6 ratios, and for those of you that are newer to this program, we're going to be going all through that week by week from next week onwards. And so we'll be breaking down the DNA test and going through each stage for you so you really understand these components, because I think everyone now has got their results. For those of you that are coming to the end of the program, you've been through that. You can go back and watch those videos. But we also want to keep alcohol consumption relatively low. I say less than 4 drinks weekly. Actually, the research on this is very mixed. From a longevity perspective, there are some studies that you see that actually a drink a day is quite good. The key thing here is moderation. I do see that women in perimenopause can find that they suddenly feel like they just can't drink alcohol at all. Often that can be something that really aggravates things like hot flashes. We want to reduce stress. That's going to help support the HPA axis and help the adrenals pick up this production. Doing exercise is important, but as you'll see in today's presentation, kind of cycling it or syncing it around your cycle is positive. These are the key inflammatory foods that most people to a degree will struggle with. So gluten, wheat, you can have wheat intolerance, you can have gluten intolerance, you can have both. Gluten, I think everyone has a threshold. I'm not quite that extreme on gluten. I know there's some practitioners that believe you should absolutely withdraw it completely from your diet. I tend to eat some small amounts of sourdough. That's probably where I get gluten. I don't really eat very much else. I don't eat pasta or anything else, or really any bagels or things like that. Occasionally, I might have, there's a specific wrap that I like in the UK called piadina, which is basically just wheat and olive oil. It's an Italian wrap. It's quite nice that you can get from Ocado. I have the mini one, so I tend not to. It is quite inflammatory. Sugar's very inflammatory on your body. Seed oil is highly inflammatory, so you want to get all of those out of the diet. And for some people, cow's dairy. Now, cow's dairy is probably the biggest thing that I see for people in terms of breakouts. If you're getting breakouts on your skin and you feel like you're getting acne, remove dairy from your diet. Not necessarily so much things like cheese or butter, but definitely milk makes a huge difference. So people who like have a latte a day, for example, as soon as they remove that, their skin just seems to clear up. If you're getting headaches, anxiety symptoms, brain fog, things like that, it can be histamine intolerance. It isn't quite clear why, but estrogen seems to increase histamine. So as estrogen starts to drop, you can get less produced and you can get some unwanted symptoms. So in perimenopause, some people become quite histamine intolerant, and then they can get things like hives as well. Histamine stimulating foods, you want to be careful here with your like probiotic rich foods. So if you're having fermented foods, because you're doing that because it enhances your gut health, so things like sauerkraut, for example, you actually might find that you're struggling with that if you have a histamine intolerance. Histamine in food also increases the longer the shelf life of the food. So actually reheating foods could cause you a problem. So you might find that you eat something and you're perfectly fine, but then if you save it and you've got leftovers and you have it the next day, you feel really uncomfortable, you get these histamine reactions. That's because the histamine content builds up over time. And then these are the kind of key histamine containing foods. Vitamin B6 upregulates the DAO enzyme. So B6 is important for many people. You'll again see that on your genetic report, whether you have a higher need for B6. It's important for this DAO enzyme. It's also important for helping with melatonin. So we methylate serotonin into melatonin, and we need B6 to do that. So quite often, if you're having sleep disturbances as well, which can happen during perimenopause, and you're getting histamine symptoms, making sure you've got good levels of B6 can be quite a positive thing to do. Alcohol lowers allopregnanolone and interferes with this soothing effect of progesterone, and it also worsens things like histamine intolerance and aggravates hot flashes that are caused by that drop in estrogen. We want to reduce stress as well. If you've got a high level of perceived stress, you're going to have about double the risk of PMS. And stress is one of these things. Again, you can go and look at your genetic report to see in the stress and sleep section what your predisposition is in terms of your tolerance to stress. Am I just frozen? Did that cut out? No? Okay. So you can have a look in there to see what your perceived stress is. But I would encourage you as well to kind of really look at stress differently in many respects, because it's not necessarily about avoiding stress. You don't necessarily want a stress-free lifestyle. It wouldn't be very fun, because a lot of things that cause us stress are actually quite excitatory and quite rewarding and beneficial in our lives and give us that sense of achievement. But Kelly McGonigal has a really, really good TED talk all about stress and perception of stress and how to kind of see it as excitement. Adrenaline blocks your progesterone receptors, and that again also depletes GABA. So we don't want to have too much adrenaline all the time. So if you feel like you're constantly running on adrenaline, then you might end up with a harder time during perimenopause. You might have worse PMS style symptoms. In extreme situations, stress will impair ovulation. So if you're going through very extreme stress, and there is a degree of a delayed effect. So when we look at the life cycle of an egg, it is about 100 days. So what you're experiencing now is not necessarily as a result of the current stressful situation you're in. It can be up to 3 months ago what was occurring. So like if you're going through a really stressful, intense period now, I'll put my hand up there, then that could manifest itself a bit later. Exercise is great because it lowers stress, it reduces inflammation, it also boosts serotonin. So exercise is amazing. Exercise is fantastic for burning off stress in the moment. Meditation is better at burning off a backlog of stress. So they actually work very well together. I find that on a daily basis, I like to meditate and move my body in some way or another. And then we look at cycle syncing, right? So this is where you're cycling your foods and your exercise around your monthly cycle. So we have this infradian rhythm as women. I'm not very good at speaking today, sorry. And so you can see here, this is menstruation at the beginning of the month. This is where we have the follicular stage, and you can see follicle stimulating hormone. Some people like test FSH to see whether they're close to menopause. It's not really the best judge. Most doctors medically will not look at that. In fact, if you're over the age of 45 and you go and see a doctor because you've got menopausal symptoms, they probably won't even blood test you. They'll just start giving you stuff. It isn't the best guide, but generally you do see FSH go up because it's almost like it's shouting louder to the ovaries to do something. So it's really turning up the volume. And then you have ovulation in the middle of the month, and then this is the luteal phase. It's in this bit here, days 21 to 28 on a 28-day cycle, that you need to really be looking at your self-care more. Now, everything that you're doing in this program, right, is improving the life cycle of that egg over the 100-day period. But it's just that the stress management phase here of not overdoing things is really important at this point. And what we see in the early stages of perimenopause, very early perimenopause this is that we start to see really shortened cycles. And this can be so annoying because you find that women are getting like a 19-day cycle. You didn't ovulate. If you're having a period at day 19, I'm willing to bet on it that you didn't ovulate that month. And so you're not going to have as much progesterone production, most particularly if you're stressed. You can then have a very heavy period. And so quite a few clients that I've had fall into this thing where they feel like they're almost forever bleeding because their cycles become really short. It's really, really heavy and intense. But again, the more things that you can do, if you've got weight that you need to lose some weight, excess body fat is going to contribute to estrogen dominance because fat cells, particularly the ones around the abdominal area, are quite active and they produce extra estrogen. And sometimes that's why it can be harder to lose weight at this time of your life, because actually your body's kind of saying, well, this is a really good way of me producing a bit more estrogen when it's dropping off. So your menstruation's feedback, that's how I would encourage you to look at it. You want to menstruate at least every 35 days. Ideally, it's going to be somewhere between 28 and 29 days. If it's a long cycle, again, just like a short cycle of 19 days, this can indicate that it was anovulatory, or it might be that you had a long lead up in that follicular stage, so it took longer for a follicle to develop. If you're under the age of 45, a long cycle is usually caused by stress or undereating. So carbs are important for women. This I see a lot when people go on a ketogenic diet. They start to lose their monthly cycle. And I've seen women actually believe that they are in menopause, and then when they come off the keto diet, they find that they weren't in menopause and their cycle returns. So we want to be having carbs, and actually carbs at the end of the month are really important. Carbs post-exercise are really important for reducing that stress. In some cases, you can have PCOS, which is a syndrome. PCOS is there's different forms of polycystic ovaries, because you can have cysts without having the syndrome. If you have the syndrome, like I have, it's a little bit more of a metabolic challenge, because this continues beyond menopause, because it is a syndrome. You have potentially impaired insulin sensitivity and things like that you're dealing with. So you're going to have to be a little bit more strict and tailored with the things you do, but it can totally be managed. If you're over 45, sometimes if you're having a long follicular phase, it can be thyroid challenges. That's another thing that comes up for women quite commonly, is they start to get a bit of reduced thyroid function. We see a bigger rise in autoimmune disorders as you move into perimenopause and menopause, and autoimmune disorders tend to be higher in women as well. So aligning with your cycle is really syncing with your cycle. There's lots of people that have sort of popularized it. It was researched and founded by Elisa Vitti. She has trademarked cycle syncing, but then Stacey Sims was also talking about it for years preceding that in her book Raw. So there has been quite a lot of scientific studies on it. Stacey Sims got a really good talk if you want to watch it. I love the TED Talks because they're 12 minutes. Women are not small men. I also have podcasts with both of these. So if you go back on my website and look through the list, you can listen to podcasts with both Elisa and Stacey. But essentially, you can eat, work out, and manage your project, according to where you are in your menstrual cycle. So you are going to be more creative at certain times of the month as well. It's not just about the fitness and the nutrition, and you can do this through journaling. I do have, which I have been testing with some one-to-one clients, a female biohacking journal that I use. If you have the app Notability, and it's something you want to have a look at in terms of tracking certain things, you can get in touch with me. It's something I've been developing, and you want to have a go with it. But essentially, you can start to get insights through journaling and understand when you're best doing certain different things, and when you're more kind of into more administrative work, like around your menstruation can be a good time sometimes for sort of introspection. And so you can do a lot with it. If you're aligning with those hormonal cycles, you're going to be enhancing your health and performance, because you're going to be helping with the balance of these hormones and with ensuring ovulation. So what you can do is, if you're doing this, you can, and I'll show you how to do it in a second, you can reduce some of your hormonal symptoms. You can enhance your energy, because you're going to be going with this ebb and flow, just like the tide does around the moon. You can have a healthier and leaner body, because there's some evidence that if you do push, like I was saying earlier, don't really push full pelt in that late luteal phase, what can happen is you actually undo some of the gains you've made earlier in the month. So you're actually gaining sufficient muscle mass, you're burning more fat in the month, you've got your workouts optimized, and then you push, you can raise cortisol, raise inflammation, impair insulin sensitivity, and kind of undo some of the gains that you've made. So it is about being really kind and supportive to yourself. And I always think, hold yourself to a high standard, but be gentle at the same time. Grant yourself some grace. So again, this is really just showing you, this is probably a better close up of what's going on here. And you can see that this is when we have progesterone, which is why we would take the sample testing, whether that was blood test or urine through something like the Dutch test at day 19, because we're going to catch it at its peak. In polycystic ovaries, this luteinizing hormone never really gets high enough because there's an interaction between the release of luteinizing hormone and the release of insulin. And if insulin is constantly too high, it impairs this, which is why you end up with cysts, because it's almost like the egg is trying to pop out and then it's cyst. It never actually, you don't ovulate. So you get this follicle developing and then the cyst remains. So estrogen's job is to lay down the lining of the uterus, right? And assist with conception. That's the whole idea. Every month, nature thinks that we should be having another baby potentially. So the corpus luteum, which is left behind after you ovulate, makes progesterone. So the healthier you are, the healthier this temporary gland is going to be. And if you were to fall pregnant, it will make that progesterone and keep that uterine lining in place right up until 12 weeks when the placenta takes over. So the second half, your progesterone should be higher than estrogen, as you saw on that chart, ideally. That's not what's happening in a lot of women. They're actually getting higher levels of estrogen and there's not enough progesterone, which is why they're getting these symptoms. Now, if you're getting too much adrenaline and cortisol, then you may have impaired progesterone production. So your perception of pressure and urgency is important. So, it's this concept of not being a busy fool, right? We've become very, very busy in our lives, but we want to actually operate with a sense of calm, productivity. Worrying about what other people think, really common for women. I think if you end up trying to please everyone, you're going to end up pleasing no one, including yourself. So it's easier said than done, but if you can try not to. Caffeine also contributes to this as well, because it raises things like adrenaline and cortisol. So you want to be thinking about how much caffeine you're having, most particularly not letting it affect your sleep, so not having it too later in the day. Psychological stress can often be constant. This is something to watch, that voice in your head that we all have, and the ego, and just learning to separate yourself from your thoughts more is going to be a really powerful thing to do. So that can be done through things like meditation and mindfulness, which are different, so they're not to be confused. Mindfulness is really bringing presence to the present moment. The more present you are, the more mindful you are in that experience. And we tend to be having a harder time when we're in the past or when we're looking at the future. Generally, the present moment is usually, not in all cases, but is usually okay. Cortisol is a chronic stress hormone because it used to mean that food was scarce, and it is anti-inflammatory in nature. So it actually reduces your sensation of pain. However, if it's elevated for long periods of time, it's very drying on the system and it interferes with sex hormone production, because if you're really stressed, it's not really a good time to bring a baby into the world. So it will compromise your adrenal production of progesterone. This is important in your cycling years, but also post-menopause, because remember, you're relying on these adrenals post-menopause. Now, the star of the show is the corpus luteum, because this is what's producing progesterone. And so you need a really nutrient-rich diet to have a healthy corpus luteum. And as I say, this life cycle of the egg is around 100 days. So if there's any disruption in the egg's journey, you can end up with period problems. These are all the things that estrogen does. And when you look at this, you start to realize just how important estrogen is and why we struggle so much after menopause. And yet baby girl born today is expected to live to 100. So you can see that actually you're going to spend potentially as much as half of your life post-menopause, depending on when you go through menopause, for somebody that's born today. So we really, really want to work on these things. They're so important. We need to manage our stress. We need to be strength training, as I always say, for our bone health and our muscle health. They're really, really important. When you get sick, when you get old, people die of sarcopenia. I saw my dad fall so many times and just black and blue. And it is heartbreaking to see when someone's muscle mass, he had renal disease, so it's more exacerbated. But it's very heartbreaking to see And you really want to build up those amino acid reserves because they are what's used to build immune cells as well. So every time you get sick, you're going to be drawing on that. So the more that you can do this and the more that you prioritize this post-menopause, the more you're going to really set yourself up for better health. In terms of brain health, it really is a case of use it or lose it. You want to constantly be stimulating your brain with new challenges and things, which is why in retirement, even doing crosswords and Sudoku and things like that, anything that you do that uses your brain, just like muscles, it very much is use it or lose it. And then we want to make sure we get enough nutrients for brain health. And we did that module on the brain and how to protect against things like Alzheimer's. Sleep is extremely important, and it's a real challenge because as you go through menopausal years, your sleep starts to reduce and you're waking up more, which is why you need to be that much more careful with your sleep hygiene. Your insulin sensitivity is going down as we start to lose estrogen, so we need to make sure that we are, again, having sufficient muscle mass, which improves insulin sensitivity, but getting the right ratios of things like fats in our diet, protein in our diet. And if you are very carb sensitive, this is going to apply even more for you. Estrogen is also antioxidant in nature in the body. And this is why, actually looking and thinking, well, do I think about either body or bioidentical hormone therapy can be a really positive thing to really help you. So as I said, estrogen does have this Goldilocks effect. It needs to be balanced out by progesterone. Really, really important. And progesterone helps reduce all that bloating, the anxiety symptoms you get, the low mood, the PMS, everything that you experience, not just in your menstruating years if you struggle with PMS, but also in perimenopause. So in that first follicular phase, so this is day 1 to 12, this is how you can start to optimize things around your cycle. This is when your hormones are at their lowest. So when you're bleeding, you are most like a man, which sounds like crazy, but you are. Now, some women in this very early stage feel very depleted, particularly if you have heavy periods, because remember, your iron levels are going to be going very low. So checking your ferritin is always important. You want to make sure that you've got really, really good iron stores. Your doctor is likely to say that if your ferritin is at a level of 20, that's okay. In my experience, you don't feel good until it's between 60 and 80, right? Everything gets thick. Well, lots of things get down regulated, like hair growth, for example, which also unfortunately thins out as estrogen drops off. But if your iron levels are low as well, that will be affecting it. It will affect your energy levels. So you want to make sure that you've got enough ferritin. Heme iron is the most bioavailable form of iron. So that is what we can get from red meat. However, you can take iron supplements. Thorne do a really good one, Solga do one, where the iron is chelated. So it's attached to amino acid that's helping you absorb it better. The other thing is they're more gentle on the stomach, because if you're just taking iron that your doctor gives you, I think it's like ferrous sulfate, it's very rough on the stomach often, causes constipation. These are non-constipating forms. And then you can take high-dose vitamin C alongside it. And by doing that, even microdosing vitamin C has some impact. When I say microdosing, I mean small dosing, like 75 milligrams, has some impact on iron absorption. You actually don't need very much. But if you higher dose it, remember, you're helping to support things like collagen production. It's a powerful antioxidant in the body, and you can take up to 3 grams across a day. You can really take it to bowel tolerance. And if you're taking iron, that's going to actually help you. If you're getting any constipating effects, go to the toilet, because vitamin C is very good at helping with that alongside magnesium. But here at this point, your hormones are lowest. So even if you feel very, very tired and depleted in the early days of your period, you're going to still have a higher rate of recovery as you exit that period. Now, some women feel fantastic in their period. So for me personally, I actually exercise super well from the very first day of my period. I don't actually notice a tremendous difference across the month. I think I'm slightly less strong towards the end, and I definitely probably don't feel like doing those HIIT workouts in that last week. But certainly by the time I get to menstruation, actually I feel pretty good in general. If you're not, then and you're getting those PMS symptoms, that's when you'll be looking at everything we're talking about to try and optimize it and to set yourself like a 90, 100-day target of thinking, how can I get this a lot better so that I feel really, really different? But most women, within like 3 to 4 days of their period, they're starting to feel better. So if you're not in the beginning, then you can do things like yoga, Pilates, just down regulate stuff, and also at the end of your cycle. Your metabolism, however, is a little bit slower at this time of the month. So this is important. This is when you're going to have less insulin sensitivity at this point. So if you were going to carb cycle around your workouts, around your menstrual cycle, this is when you would be reducing it. So these are the kind of foods that you'd be looking at. Having enough magnesium at this point is also important. Seafood, kelp, and nori are going to help to remineralize iron and zinc. Zinc also really super important. Zinc, again, if you're someone, I was talking about dairy with symptoms of things like acne, zinc is also really important. If your zinc levels are low, often that can, when you correct that, you actually can get your skin clears up quite a bit. But at this point, you're looking at low glycemic veggies and fruits, and you want lots of healthy fats, lots of healthy protein, anti-inflammatory foods, things like turmeric, really powerful at reducing inflammation. So is oily fish. Remember to use the acronym SMASH. So sardines, mackerels, anchovies, salmon and herrings are the ones that are lowest in mercury and highest in omega-3. Tuna does have omega-3 if you're eating it fresh. However, canned tuna, the omegas have often been destroyed for the most part. It doesn't preserve them very well. Obviously, there's an implication with mercury if you're having too much tuna as well. Taking curcumin can be very positive. It seems to have really positive benefits, certainly in animal studies, for protecting against Alzheimer's as well, and removing some of the tau proteins and amyloid plaque. Fitness-wise, you be in the first few days, if you're feeling really tired and depleted, you do things like walking, yoga, massage, sauna, all those types of activities. And then you can start moving into your HIIT workouts and your sprints and heavy resistance training. So you'll start to feel stronger. If you're taking the pill, it's not going to be able to optimize around your menstrual cycle. The scientific studies show you're actually not as strong when you're taking synthetic estrogen. Work-wise, this is a time for really brainstorming and like envisaging. You can explore new ideas and things at this point. Then you've got ovulation, which is the main event. This is where you're most outward going and outward focusing. I think a few people are having trouble, aren't they? Yeah. You want to have plenty of fiber. So do you remember estrogen's been really rising here? We don't want to have symptoms of estrogen dominance. So we definitely want to make sure that you're optimizing your gut health, because you've got phase 1 and 2 detoxifications happening in the liver, phase 3 is happening in the gut. So we want to make sure that we have enough fiber. Now look at your DNA report, and again, we'll come back to this, but if you're somebody that has been told to have, you've got a higher need for things like cruciferous vegetables, I'd really encourage you to incorporate those in your diet, because that says you've got certain SNPs that are missing that are not going to help you produce the enzymes and compounds you need. So we want to be able to support that with sulforaphane from cruciferous vegetables, and also the allium family, so like leeks and onions and garlic, really important as well. You want to increase glutathione, because glutathione is very supportive in terms of that liver detoxification as well. And this is when you can have some grains, but lighter grains, things that contain protein with them, like quinoa, beans, lentils, those types of things. And make sure that, because at this point you might be doing more intense style workouts, that you fuel post-workout for energy. Now, actually, the strength training that you've got in your programs, what you would do is you don't need to change, because the thing with this is if you had a goal of fat loss and increasing muscle mass, which is what most people have generally, is a little bit of body recomposition. If you just said, well, I'm just going to do yoga for a week, and now I'm going to do a high intensity workout for a week, and now I'm going to strength train for a week, and now I'm just going to chill out and do walking and stuff, you're very unlikely to get enough stimulus for those results. So what I'd rather you do is you've got your programs, but you just dial things back within it. So if at the end of the month you feel really tired, you're depleted, you don't feel you can really bring it, then you might not be lifting as heavy. You might move into more of those endurance ranges, which, remember, and we'll go over this on Wednesday, when we're looking at your power, endurance and strength ratios genetically, the best results come from cross training. So it might be that you think, Okay, fine. In my workout was 6 to 12 reps, but actually I'm going to now increase those reps 12 to 20. I'm going to go with a lighter weight. It's a bit more gentle. I might be doing 2 sets instead of 3 sets or 1 set instead of 2 sets, depending on where you are, because I'm just lessening things off. That's in the last stage of the month. At this point, you can be going full pelt out. During ovulation, actually, this is a really good time. So that's kind of how you would do it. And you can feel more confident at this stage and more powerful. And you might notice at ovulation that actually you feel more powerful and stronger in everything that you're doing. You might find that when you're doing, if you put in some sprint training, for example, you can go for longer or you can go harder. Now, some people, when you get that surge of hormones coming up and it comes back down, some people get a dip. This again is not uniform in its application. Some people, not everybody. Some people actually have ovulation, they feel really at their peak, they feel really good, and they continue up here for quite a long time, and they don't really see too much of a drop off until the end. I would say I'll probably only get a day or two, not even really massively, where I feel things drop off. So the more you've tried to optimize everything in your life, the less you're going to see this. But some people do get this thing where they're a bit meh after ovulation and they get a bit of a drop. Yeah, so if you get that, then go with it. Don't try to really push through it, because you should get a little bit buoyancy come back anyway. As I say, you've got much more outward focused energy during ovulation. So this is the time, if you're fortunate enough that you run your own business, or you're looking at social arrangements that you want to do, this is actually a really good time. You're going to definitely feel a bit more outgoing. And then in your luteal phase, you want to be making sure you're getting enough leafy greens to boost things like calcium and magnesium. This will help to reduce fluid retention. Optimizing for progesterone and managing the stress and doing the things we're talking about, also going to minimize that fluid retention. But now you've got a little bit more flexibility in terms of your metabolism. Definitely towards the end of the month. And so you can have things like more root vegetables. You've got better insulin sensitivity at this point. So you can kind of have sweeter food. And if you do go for naturally sweeter food, that's actually going to help to stave off some of these cravings that some people really do struggle with. Fitness wise, you might find that you split this into 2 phases. So you feel really good in the first part of this luteal phase, and then you start to lessen things off just as you're coming up to your period. And you start to move more into flexibility work. Work-wise, this can be more introspective, finishing off projects and things, maybe doing admin work if you really are feeling sort of under the weather with it. But going a little bit more inward is naturally how we feel at this time. And as I say, this is days 21 to 28 is really the time that you just want to be a bit gentle with yourself, grant yourself some grace, and not really crush those workouts if you're not feeling it. If you're feeling it, it's fine, but then look at your recovery, because remember, everything you do is built in recovery, not in the gym. Everything that we do exercise-wise, we're breaking down and then we rebuild in recovery. So getting the recovery is going to be important. You can seed cycle. There's nothing in the scientific literature that I can see to tell you that supports this, but it is widely used, and I've had amazing benefits, in particular for PMS, with clients with this. And so what you would do is just have a tablespoon of pumpkin seeds and flax seeds at the beginning of the month for the first 2 weeks, and then in the second stage you're going to move to sunflower sesame seeds. If you're post-menopause, remember, you still produce estrogen, you still produce progesterone, just in smaller amounts, so you can just pick any point that you're in and decide that you're going to do 2 weeks of seed cycling. And that will just help you produce healthier levels of those hormones. Remember, some of that estrogen is going to come from testosterone production, because you produce testosterone in the ovary still, and that gets aromatized into estrogen. And then you want to also be looking at, sorry, did you want that slide, Sue? Do you want me to go back? Oh, you go back, hold on. Hang on, is it going to let me? Yeah, here we go. Here we go, there you go. We've got a download as well on this that I can share. So supplements that can help you enhance progesterone and GABA. Magnesium's definitely your friend. Definitely your friend here. If you are in the US and you're listening, it doesn't apply in the UK, I don't believe, or Europe, Bioptimizers are doing a Valentine's offer. So if you go to bioptimizers.com/Angela and you enter my code Angela10, you'll actually get 20% off until midnight tonight. It doesn't apply in the UK. But magnesium is great. It's in the UK, you'll just get your usual 10% off. And it helps you to make the steroid hormones, including progesterone. So you do want to make sure you're getting enough magnesium. It enhances GABA, it makes you feel more relaxed. You may find that if you increase magnesium too much, you start to go, you find yourself on the toilet a little bit more, so you can adjust what you need. There's some evidence that magnesium production is peak at about midday. So actually, I find it's helpful to take magnesium in the morning and the evening, and the evening can help with sleep. Also getting enough nuts, seeds and dark leafy greens, and if you're doing that seed cycling, you'll be helping as well. And then B6 is also important. The most bioavailable form, you'll see it on supplements, is P5P. This again is essential for your synthesis of progesterone and GABA. It's also really important for converting that serotonin into melatonin. It helps you detoxify estrogen. It's a natural diuretic and relieves things like histamine intolerance. And you can, if you are struggling with histamine-like symptoms, quercetin can also help. You want to be careful not having too much over the long term because it can affect nerves. Some people like to try Vitex. If you're going to do it, taking it before breakfast is better because that's when your pituitary gland is most active. And then you would just stop that 5 days before your period. So some people really find Vitex helpful for reducing PMS-style symptoms. In the early stages of perimenopause, maca is really good at helping to support healthy progesterone production, as long as you don't have things like thyroid goiters. And then selenium is also important. Have a look at your genetic report. You might be someone who has an increased need for selenium. You can get it really easily from things like organ meats and Brazil nuts. Just a few Brazil nuts a day will help you raise your selenium to a good level. But that's really important for the health of that corpus luteum. It's also a powerful antioxidant, so it's really important post-menopause as well. And you can, if you've tried everything else and you're struggling, you can take progesterone. So doctors can sometimes be a bit resistant, but you can take progesterone without taking estrogen, and that can be helpful. And you can take that in a cream or capsule form. That was a previous training I did. So that completes it. I'm just going to have a look in the chat. How do you measure a menstruation after a hysterectomy, still having ovaries? So you're not going to menstruate. You will still be producing estrogen and progesterone. So if you've still got your ovaries, and that's why what can happen is if you've had a hysterectomy, you've had your womb removed, it may bring menopause forward slightly earlier, but it doesn't put you into surgical menopause. So you're still going to be producing estrogen and progesterone. It's just that that egg isn't going in and implanting anywhere. And you're not going to get as much to like thicken up a lining because you haven't got the womb there, but you'd still get benefits, for example, from things like seed cycling. Yes, Michelle, I do have the journal, and I would need to, if you wanted to try this, I would definitely need to do a session actually to explain how to use this journal. You can use it as in-depthly as you want to, but I can come back to you guys on that. Kirsty, if I'm measuring for ovulation through waist temperature and ovulation sticks and then I don't see it, do I still enter a luteal phase? I would still seed cycle, so I'd still do it across the 2 weeks, the same as someone who is in menopause. It just means that if you haven't ovulated, progesterone production is going to be lower, but we still want to really try to support that as much as we can. So yeah, I would still swap over at the usual phase. If you have very high levels of ferritin, and you might see on your genetic report that you have a predisposition to hemochromatosis where you build up very high levels, you want to be careful. In some cases, doctors will then advise that you give blood to actually drain off those iron stores. So iron can be very, very toxic in high amounts, and it can contribute to oxidative stress. So you want to monitor ferritin. Janice, is that on Bioptimizers? You got the offer in the UK? Because I tested it earlier and I messaged them because I was going to send out an email.
I had an email telling me that the offer was available, and I got another one today saying it's until midnight tonight. But when I went on, I didn't actually need anything. So
yeah, I think though that's a general email, because I emailed the team this afternoon because I'm going to send an email out with the link because I was hoping everyone would get 20% off, and they came back to me, oh, okay, there's another code, VAL20. Okay, fine. So if that works in the UK, then definitely use that, Michelle, because they came back to me and said that it wasn't available because Bioptimizers UK is run by a different company. So, and you kind of get redirected. And when I then put any code in at checkout, it readjusted. But if it works, brilliant. I'll make a note of that and circulate that one. Thank you, Michelle. I think we've got through. Does anyone have any more questions? We'll be kind of putting that together with the DNA side of things.
I'd just like to say I would also be very interested in that journal that you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Let me make a note of who's interested. You need Notability to be able to use it. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? It's nice to see you guys. I missed you all last week.
Angela, I just have one quick question.
Yeah.
Hi. So when you're talking about avoiding seed oils, flaxseed and hemp seed in that category as well?
Yeah, they're not. So when we're thinking of seed oils, I'm thinking of things like rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, or canola is rapeseed. With flaxseed oil, it's very good, but you want to make sure that you never heat it. So it's got a very, very low smoke point. But as long as you're having like cold pressed flaxseed oil, that's fine. It's more to do with the extraction process of some of the others that mean they're oxidized by the time they get to you. But no, you're right. Flaxseed and hemp should be fine.
Okay, thanks.
The Bioptimizers, one thing I have noticed is their chocolate protein shake is now available in the UK. I don't know if it is in Germany, but it is like the most chocolatey chocolate. That contains, it's all plant-based protein, and it contains hemp and pea and other proteins, and it's really, really nice. And if you thicken it up, like my favorite way to drink it is basically to have a few scoops of the Bioptimizers chocolate protein. I mix it with Plenish almond milk, loads of ice, half an avocado, some collagen powder, and sometimes a scoop of almond or peanut butter, and that just makes a really nice thick shake. And the more ice you add, you make it into a smoothie bowl. You can like top it with seeds and like coconut, or you can just have it as a drink. I like it as a thick drink with a straw. Sometimes I'll add in flax seeds as well, or if I don't always cycle like seeds and stuff necessarily because I'm just always in a rush and forget, but you can do that as well. So that's a really nice one. Right, I think we've come. Oh, Michelle has a code for Plenish. Awesome. Are you ordering it from their website then? Because I always end up getting it on Ocado. I do like Plenish. Plenish, by the way, do really good almond milk, coconut milk as well. Oh, and all their shots. Oh, amazing. I'm going to write down your code, Michelle. Perfect. Yeah, only 3 ingredients. That's true. I really, really think they're good. Oh, you can only find it in Sainsbury's. Okay, I get it from Ocado. Right. Well, we've come to the top of the hour. Thank you, everyone. Michelle, you sent me some questions on email as well. I'm catching up on my emails from last week, so I will come back to you on those. I may even do them actually on Wednesday. Thank you. I may do them on Wednesday actually, because I'm sure other people will be interested in the questions you had as well. Right. Well, thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Have a really nice evening, and I will see you back here for Wednesday's session. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Angela.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shane.